This is a DW733 planer from DeWalt. It's the original lunchbox planer from them. This model is probably 25 to 30 years old, and it features a 2-blade cutter head. This is a helical head cutter from a company called FindBuy Tools. In this package, you actually get the cutter head, you get 2 Torx wrenches for the installation, a set of screws, and 60 of the cutter knives themselves. All right, full disclosure before we go any further, they did send me this in return for this video and my honest opinion on everything. Any links that you see in the description will be affiliate links, and I'll earn a small commission off of those if you click on that and go to this product and buy it. All right, first thing we need to do, we'll just run some boards through with the old cutter head installed, then we'll install the new one and see how much of an improvement it makes. Let's get started. So for the first test, we're just gonna run it through. I'm not gonna turn a dust collector on. I've got a piece of red oak here that we know is pretty good at chipping out if you don't run it through correctly. And I've got a sound meter set up. It's an app on my phone. It's gonna test the sound. So see what the decibels are on that. And yeah, let's get it running. I apologize for the autofocus not picking up the phone, but hopefully you can see here, it was running about 84 decibels running and then spiked up to about 93 when I set the board in, and it settled out about 87 to 88 decibels as it was running through. All right, so that, if you can see, there's just a slight little bit of snipe. I didn't really try to avoid the snipe. Usually I pull up on the end of the board and it'll keep that from happening, but finish is pretty smooth. Now these are brand new set of blades. I just had them sharpened. I don't see a whole lot of ripples, which considering it's only a 2-blade planer, it actually does a pretty good job. So that's what we get with the regular knives. Let's go ahead and tear it apart, put the new cutter head in, and we'll run the test over again. So here I'm just using a 5mm hex to remove the top 4 bolts out of the cover. Then we'll take the handle off for the crank. And then this whole cover and side parts can lift off as one unit. We'll set that aside. Now with just a Phillips head screwdriver, we can take the bolts out that hold the dust chute on. There's just one on each end and then one underneath here. Now this is kind of going to be a theme as we tear things down. We're going to shake dust out of places we didn't even know there was dust. So I'm just going to run the vacuum over it. Make sure you don't suck up any of your nuts and bolts as you're going. This is just the hex wrench that comes with the planer itself. We're going to take the 4 bolts out that hold the cover on, and then we can move on to getting the blades out. I started using the factory wrench, and then I remembered that I have power tools. So just a 10mm socket and zip those out real quick. Then we can move on to getting the rest of those things tore down. All right, the next step is going to be taking the lifting mechanism out. Before you do this, make sure you run the cutter head up almost as far as you possibly can. I only went about halfway, and you'll see where this comes back to bite me a little bit later. Both of these sprockets have 2 set screws in them that take a 3mm hex. Once you loosen those up just enough to get them off the shaft, you can loosen the big bolt in the middle. That'll take the tension off the chain. Make sure you keep this in the orientation that it came off so that you can put it back the correct way. Next, we need to use a Phillips head just to take this locking arm off and the spring that activates it. The new cutter head won't use it, so you can take that out and dispose of it as you wish. Now with a 4mm hex, you can take the 2 bolts out of the retaining plate up top, lift up on the spring, and then you can pull the plate out through the side. With the retaining clip and the spring out of the way, you can crank the shaft all the way up out of the cutter head and move on to the other side. Take the 2 Phillips head screws out of the bottom of this cover, and then you can just pull it down to remove it. Do a little bit more vacuuming of some chips that we just found. Take a couple pictures of the sprockets just so we know we can remember how they go back in. And then with a good set of snap ring pliers, you can take these snap rings off the sprockets and pull that chain assembly off. Thought I was going to have to take both of these chains off, but I did figure out that there's enough slop in this to allow you to get in and hit the end of that shaft anyway. So I'm just going to leave that all in there. I'm not going to take the retaining ring off the end of the shaft on this side because we're going to drive it all out the other end. Just using a scrap of wood to hold the cutter head in place while I take this nut off. It's a 23mm. Going to put that on the impact gun just to bump it off real quick, and that'll let us take the pulley off. All right, with the nut off, I need to get this belt off, and the easiest way to do that is to just get a little pressure behind it. Watch your fingers. And then you're gonna roll it forward. It will walk off of that pulley. You might have to do the same thing on the top like that. Because eventually it's going to get crossed up where it won't come off anymore. Just be careful, don't pinch your fingers. But taking it off is the easy part. Getting it back on is never fun. Now I'll just pull the pulley off. There is a key right here on the shaft. Don't want to lose that. So we're going to set our pulley and our key over here. And there is another really big snap ring right there. All right, so this one is an inside snap ring. So we're going to squeeze it in. You might have to work it a little bit to get it out of the groove. Let's pop that out. Now we can go to the other side. We shouldn't have to take the snap ring out of the other side. We can tap this through, and then that'll take the cutter head out.
Now I'm just clamping the planer down to the table just so it doesn't move while I'm actually trying to get the shaft out.
All right, I just got a block of wood. I'm gonna set that in here. Try to keep it on the bearing itself if I can. There's the old cutter head. I'll just clean up inside those bearings, clean up everything else that we can clean while we're here, and then we'll put it back together. All right, now I got everything cleaned up. I'm just gonna put some grease, just some moly grease, axle bearing grease, whatever you wanna call it.
You just need a light film of grease here, just enough to help the bearings go in.
And we'll slide this in. I'm gonna leave this nut on. That'll protect our threads.
Now, holding on to the far end to keep the bearing lined up with the hole, I'm just going to tap this in with a rubber mallet to get things started.
Just gonna work my way around. One side of the bearing to the other. Walk the bearing in until you can't go anymore. And that goes smooth enough. That's not gonna hurt anything. You might need to take a flat screwdriver and just make sure that is in its groove. There it goes.
Now make sure you put the key back in the slot in the shaft, then you can just tap the pulley back on with a piece of wood. Now the nut that came with the kit's about twice as wide as it needs to be, and it actually runs out of shaft before it bottoms out. So I just used the low profile nut that came off the original shaft with, luckily it was the same thread. And then I torqued that down to about 3 to 4 micro ugga-duggas since they didn't give us a torque spec for it.
So put the belt back on, just reverse. Don't get it all the way on, just catch a couple of the ribs.
Just keep a constant inward pressure on it while you roll the pulleys and it'll work itself back on there. Just make sure you get it all the way onto the pulley when you're done. Once our belt's back on our pulley, we can move to the other side and put our drive sprockets back on. These just slide back in place the way they came out. Put our snap rings on, and again, just make sure these are fully seated into their grooves so they hold.
Plug this in real quick. Make sure I'm not doing anything stupid. Stand off to the side. And we're good.
With a successful test run, I made sure to unplug the machine, put the sprocket cover back on, and then I moved on to the lifting mechanism.
And let's not forget to put this back in.
This is where I really regret not running the cutter head all the way up in the beginning. You can see here, it's just going to make things a lot easier. If it was up, the springs wouldn't be fully compressed like they are, and they're just going to fight me to the very end.
All right. I'm gonna run this down until we got that slot, and then we can get our spring retainer back in place.
With the other side back in place, I went ahead and took some measurements just to make sure the cutter head was actually sitting parallel to the base before we connected the two sides back together.
4 5/8. 4 5/8. So I'm gonna lock that down. Now we can put our sprockets back on the bottom.
Now, when you put this chain and sprockets back in, you actually want to leave a little bit of slop in the chain. I'm putting it on way too tight here, and I'm going to have to go back in and fix it later because it's making it really hard to crank up and down.
This down.
I've done this in the past and made the same mistake before, so apparently it didn't stick with me very long.
All right, so now this is probably going to be the longest part. Got 56 of these cutters to put in. So these are 4-sided. They've already got them marked out so you can remember which way you have them in there. Try to put them all in the same orientation. And yeah, we'll be here a minute.
Just to be safe, I used the tools that they gave me instead of using my power tools because I didn't want to run a screw in too tight on one of these brittle carbide cutters and crack one.
And 54. Thought there was 56, but there's only 54. So that leaves me with 6 extras in case I need them.
Now you can go ahead and put all your covers back on, reinstall the hand crank, and time for some tests.
All right, let's see what we got. So our leading edge still has snipe on it. I honestly didn't think it was going to fix that, to be honest with you. It's more of a design flaw in this machine. Normally what I do when I'm feeding the board in, I'll just lift up hard on this end, and that typically keeps the front end down and reduces the snipe. But yeah, that's still got a pretty good amount of snipe there. As far as the cut itself, it feels pretty smooth. Compare it to, this side was done, it's been a while, but it was done with the straight knives, and this side is definitely smoother. And one thing I just realized that I didn't even plan this, but I actually ran that board through backwards. If you look at the ray pattern on the side here, it's all running this way. So I actually ran that in against the grain, which that's kind of impressive. Because with the blades, that would have probably tore that up and chipped it up pretty bad. So I'll run one more test with it go in the right direction, and we'll see how that works. And we'll get the dust collector going so we can test our dust collection improvements. All right, so that time I did pull up on it. Don't have any snipe at all. So I pulled up on the in-feed and the out-feed, and may have a slight bit that might be left over from the last pass, actually. But that is a pretty nice cut. I don't see any weird chatter or anything like that as it goes across the grain. It did seem to be a little bit quieter, going the right direction too, so that helps. And here's the difference in cut. See, this was the original versus what this is doing. As you can see here, the original had pretty big chips. Like I said, the oak is really hard, so it doesn't really slice like more of a softwood would come out with long strands, but the oak just kind of chips off. Now with the new cutter head, you can see it's much smaller, much finer. There's some chipping here and there, but for the most part, it's a nice, fine cut. So I think the dust collector will have a little easier time sucking that out of the machine too. So overall, so far, looking pretty good. All right, so before we get into my opinion of the cutter head, let's just take a look at what they were claiming and what my results were for that. 20% smoother finish. Definitely a smoother finish. I don't have any way of quantifying whether that's 20%, 10%, but it definitely is smoother to the touch, and the fact that I got a smooth finish running backwards against the grain, that's pretty impressive. The 50% reduction in noise, I didn't really see any difference there. I'm just using an app on my phone, so it's probably not the best measurement of decibels, and I'm assuming they're saying, it's quieter with the head running without cutting, and then with cutting, there's only 4 or 5 decibels difference between the two either way, so it's kind of hard to quantify what 50% difference would be. It's only 1 or 2 decibels. I will say it was a deeper sound that didn't have as high pitch to it, so it didn't cut through. I'm always going to have my earplugs in, everything like that anyway, because we're going to have the dust collectors running, that thing's running. You just don't want to listen to that all day. It's just not smart. 4,000 times longer life. Don't have any way of saying that that's going to be true. Obviously, a carbide cutter is going to last longer than a steel cutter, and the fact that you can turn them 4 times, you're going to get 4 times as long life out of them. I feel like they're definitely going to last a lot longer than a regular knife. No snipe or tear outs. I did see snipe like I showed you there. I still think that's just a problem with the machine itself. I can avoid that just by pulling up on the end of the board, so that really doesn't bother me too much. I've had that for years. Just have to adjust your technique to fix that. The tear out, again, I ran that through backwards on a piece of oak. Generally, if you run something through a planer backwards with knives, you're gonna get chunks taken out, and that came out nice and smooth. So I'm pretty impressed with that, and I think they definitely on point with that. The last one was the better dust collection. I could definitely see, maybe not with oak because of the chipping. You're getting small chips whether you're running it with this or with the straight knives. I think if you got into a softer wood where it's actually cutting and slicing bigger strings that tend to get stuck up inside the machine and plug it up really bad, I think that's probably where you're going to see more of a increase in dust collection. All right, final thoughts. Is it worth spending $300-400 on a new cutter head for an old planer? I think it depends on your situation. If you plan on keeping your planer for a while, it's capacity is good enough and it does everything you want it to do, it's definitely going to give you an increase in performance, and over long term it's going to save you money on the blades. So it is a good investment in that case. For someone like me who's just using it to get by until they can afford something bigger, probably not the best thing to invest in. Just go ahead and save that money up, put it into a new planer in the long run with more capacity. And I will say, I was back and forth on whether I really needed to get a helical head, and after seeing this, I probably will definitely get one in the new planer. So hopefully this has been some good information for everybody, and we're gonna wrap it up for this one. So as always, we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.